the meeting will be called to order at 7:05 Mountain. And Madam Secretary, if you could take the roll when you get an opportunity. I'm going to share my screen.
Sure. Arrowwood here. Rocco.
Here.
Szalski.
Here.
Carlos.
Present.
Latham.
Here.
Martin.
Present.
Moulton. Moulton. Come back. Rowlett.
Here.
Rufo. Rufo. Come back. Seebeck.
The voices said yes.
All right. I'm going to call the alternates. Tommaso. Roberson.
Present.
Deal. Deal. Okay. Roots.
Present.
Okay. Logan. Rogers. Okay, I'll go back to the members. Moulton, Dr. Moulton. Mike Rufo. Mike Rufo. Madam Chair, at this point, we have Dr. Moulton and Mike Rufo not present. There are two alternates that could be moved over.
Okay, and those are?
All right.
And we have some interesting, which I think can end up being interesting issues tonight. We're going to go to public comment in a moment, but I might be, depending upon what the committee's comments are and what questions we have, asking Mr. Jacobs for some input, because particularly on the first item of the agenda, I think we need to be really careful to make sure we're not potentially messing something up in trying to solve a problem, because sometimes this wording can be very, very specific when you're dealing with terms of office and quorum. So first off, public comment. So if there's any members of the public, please use the reaction button and hit the raise hand. And this would also include committee members who have something they wish to say that isn't necessarily fit neatly into an agenda item. So I'll give a moment to see if anyone raises their hand. Okay, seeing no one, I will remind everyone that so far we're still on track for a town hall for January 11th. I didn't get an answer back from staff yet, because everyone's getting ready for the holidays and whether that'll fit into their schedule as far as as I explained to you, the way their editorial, the way they send out their emails. But I also have to do a report too, which can get crazy. All right, coming up, we have two sets of minutes to approve. The first one we didn't do last time because Ms. Arrowwood was not present, so we'll take care of that first. Are there any objections to approving the November 30th meeting minutes? All right, seeing none, I know there was some corrections to the December 14th one, but I believe the secretary caught all of those with those corrections that were stated on the list, with the understanding that Ms. Arrowwood will make those corrections. Are there any objections to approving the minutes from the December 14th meeting? Right, hearing none, those are approved as well. And the chair would remind everyone that we are meeting every week until we get through these proposals. That was something that was agreed upon last meeting. All right, first up, MM, which we're going to divide into MMA and MMB, which that's how I'm going to end up moving it. Was it Mr. Rolek that brought up the point on the list that they are two entirely different subjects? And he was going to do a motion to divide. I'd mentioned that when it is two entirely different subjects, it's divisible upon the demand of one member. And I agreed they are two different subjects. I don't know why I put them together. I think I was just busy and had two things to take care of, but I probably shouldn't have put them together. So we'll do the first one, which deals with succession first. So the proposed amendments are to Article 6 for officers, or it says all of these officers shall be elected by a regular convention of the party, shall take office immediately upon close of the convention, and shall serve thereafter until the final adjournment of the next regular convention. And I wish to add at which their successors are elected. There might be better language that I might, with the committee's permission, ask Mr. Jacobs about. Similar change to where it's the National Committee, where it's everybody but the officers, to add the same language, and to add the same language to the Judicial Committee. And I know Mr. Bracco had some questions for this. So I am moving these as they're written. I will, again, ask permission to ask JJ a question in a moment. The reason for this, in case it's not immediately obvious, most bylaws do say something like this. The problem I see is, what if we, and JJ could probably answer this as well. So I'm going to have two questions for JJ, but what if we adjourn sine die, or somebody purposely, they have the numbers to adjourn sine die, though I assume if they have those numbers, they could probably pull all kinds of other funny business. But I guess the hypothetical occurred to me because most bylaws do have some sort of provision like this. What happens if we adjourn and you don't elect an LNC? Because they only serve till the final adjournment of the next regular convention. Most bylaws say something which I considered, and this is the question I have for JJ. Question number one, with our current language, what would happen if we adjourn sine die without electing a new LNC? Like, did we just implode? Question there. I don't know if there's some principle in Roberts, or General Roberts dealt with this, or there's some light you can shed on that. But the second question is, would preferable language be, and I forget which word is the magic word that requires due process, that says and until their successors are elected, or until their successors are elected, which I think would do the same thing. And if we do that other language, that or and, when I got to look at which one is preferable, that might avoid Mr. Bracco's longer, more complicated amendment. So JJ, do you have any thoughts on those two questions with the committee's consent? I don't see any objection.
Madam Chairman, with the committee's consent, first of all, the answer to your first question is easy. You would probably explode or implode if you were not to elect things. This is what I think would probably happen. If you could elect district delegates, or no, excuse me, regional representatives, they may be able to meet and fill the vacancies that would be created by adjourning sine die. That obviously is not a good way to do it.
Let me just add something there. That's really interesting, because what if we adjourned before they were, but California elects theirs ahead of time? So in theory, Region 4, California could, that's okay. That is a solution, though. It's better than implosion. Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
But on
yes.
the
So,
other issue.
The second question was language. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not familiar with Mr. Bracco's amendments, so I'm not really sure which would be preferable. But you could say until the convention. I'm just taking a look at it now. Which let me see. I can't link. Let me see if I can link in on this. Okay, I'm calling it up. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Can I take a look at this for a few seconds?
Yeah, just trying to get the best language, even forgetting what Mr. Bracco's concerns are very specific to the Judicial Committee, which we can get to. But just for the LNC, is it better to, this I thought kept it simple. But
Okay. Yeah. Let me go back and take a look at that language. Keep in mind, you didn't talk to me about this beforehand, so I'm not.
I didn't.
I'm hearing this as this is happening. I think that language would probably work, and I'm trying to think if there would be a more elegant way to state it. Let's see, until the next regular convention.
The only thing I was thinking might work is and until their successors are elected.
Or provided that their successors are elected.
Okay, I just want to make sure there wasn't any huge, weird, you go, oh my God, you don't want to word it this way because there's some implication I didn't think about. Mr. Bracco, did you wish to state your concerns with the same language? I'm going to pull down to the Judicial Committee just so that Mr. Jacobs could hear that, what your concerns are. I'm going to try to make this a little smaller so it fits on the screen with the JC.
Sure. So I don't think that my concerns are any kind of implosion risk, so that's good. The difference between the JC and the LNC is LNC is elected every convention, JC is only every other convention. So I'm looking at it and thinking about 2018 when there was no JC elected. And then in 2020, what actually happened, and I believe it might have been an amendment that year that allowed the presidential convention to fill an entirely empty JC. Given this, so it's really, let's say we had, so in 2026, we pass all this and it does, and we just, for whatever reason, 2026, we don't have a JC election. I guess my first question would be, if we were to pass this language, does that mean that the 2022 to 2026 Judicial Committee would then also become the 2026 to 2030 Judicial Committee?
Pretty much with this language, that really wasn't necessarily my intent. My intent
don't
was
think that's
never to have a gap. It was
Yeah,
the intent. Yeah.
I think that's a good thing. It's just I don't like that it is locking you in to, like, okay, if 2026 you don't have JC elections, that's kind of the whole problem that we're trying to solve. I don't like that it makes you wait 4 years rather than 2 years. Like, I don't think that there's really a way to avoid having that same, either it's empty or you have that same JC continue from 2026 to 2028. I would want a way for in 2028 to have that convention at least have the option of doing JC elections, and maybe that's just a 2-year term, whatever. But it would at least allow for different people. So, JJ, my question was, if we were to pass this language and we were to then fail to hold or fail to elect anyone, I guess would be a better description, JC elections in 2026, which is the next time that the term is up. Oh, okay, sorry. sorry,
You just
go.
muted yourself.
Yeah, I thought that JJ said he wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, yes, I'd need your permission in order to ask the question.
Oh,
From
certainly
the,
mine.
from the body, yes.
Oh, yeah, no,
No objection from me.
Yeah, if anyone ever has an objection right now, where we're trying to just get some parliamentary input, just yell it. Otherwise, I'm gonna presume there's no objection.
Okay, I will be asking occasionally as well. My question is, how is the language deal with vacancies in the off-year JC elections?
The
Okay.
existing. Oh,
Yeah,
Existing
no,
language.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Paul, I'm just trying to do it somewhat orthodox, because I think it's a parliamentary inquiry or some kind of inquiry. Vacancies are filled by the JC as long as there's at least one person left.
Okay, but what happens right now if there is no person, if in 2026, under the current bylaws,
If no one gets elected.
no one gets elected?
We have 2 years without a JC, and we have a provision later on that says if the JC is entirely vacant, should all judicial committee positions be vacant, an intervening convention, meaning a presidential convention, may fill such vacancies. What I'm trying to avoid with this thing here, I think, is having that 2-year gap. Because they're with the current language that at least eliminated the 4-year gap, but it still allows for a 2-year gap.
Well, what I would be looking at might be, and I think I might be channeling Paul here, I'm not certain. Forgive me for entering in again. This might be that you could put something in this particular clause that would say, until the successors are elected, or until the intervening presidential election, or presidential, until the presidential convention, to the intervening presidential convention. In other words, they would stay in office until, if something would happen in 2026 where you didn't elect anybody, you would have the current JC staying in office until 2028.
And I think that's the type of language which Paul is going to propose. I'm just trying to avoid multiplying language, but I guess that's the only way we can do it.
I think so, yes.
Okay, we're gonna go to then just regular committee debate. I did want to, though normally I do not interact with chat, there is a couple things because I do think it's very relevant to the committee that I wanted to bring up. Hold on. I'm not sure, or Rob, bring up your point in debate if you're I'm going to deal with a member comment. I'm going to ask the committee members to deal with what you have to say in debate, but I wanted to answer Jessica's question, which I think she had said that one regional person selecting the entire LNC isn't great. That isn't really how I think it would work. I think the way it would work, presuming Region 4 remains its own region, which isn't a guarantee, that's just the way it is now, is they would pick one person, and then those 2 people would pick the 3rd person, and then those 3 would pick the 4th person, and then those 4 would pick the 5th person. It would kind of be cascading. It wouldn't be one person picking 16 others. But it keeps us from imploding. I want to speak tiny briefly before we go to debate to now that I have my questions answered to this. I'm going to urge the committee that we don't get into the matrix again. where we go, what about this? What about that? Remember the original problem we're trying to solve. And if we go down too many rabbit holes, we are going to not fix the problem and make things worse. This is actually an existential potentiality. The fact that if we don't elect an LNC, and let's say Region 4 doesn't, that's a fail-safe. I would urge everyone not to panic over that situation. I would urge everyone to be grateful that situation is in there. Even though it wouldn't be ideal, it would keep us from imploding. I would urge us not to debate the merits of whether Region 4 should get to influence or elect the next LNC, and instead be grateful that we didn't just implode the party. However, I'd like to avoid that whole situation to begin with. But at least right now, I know that if for some reason at this upcoming convention we don't elect an LNC, I know Region 4 is electing theirs at their convention, and we won't die. Because dying is the worst of the two scenarios. And when it comes to the JC, yes, it has happened where we adjourned without electing one. Rather than complicating the language, I'd prefer just to then it would be that same JC for 2 4-year terms. That would be a highly motivating factor for people to at least elect one person to the JC. But in all reality, though some JC members here could let me know, I just know this from very few committees are you going to have people who are willing to stick around for 8 years. What's going to happen is you're going to have a bunch of vacancies, and the just like our bylaws provide, the remaining JC members would be filling their vacancies. And I doubt at the end of the 8 years, the JC would look even majority like it did at the time of the snafu. So rather than worrying, I'm just urging again, you all can do what you want, worrying about these situations. Well, what if it turns into 8 years? Is what I'm proposing better than what it is now? Aiming for the perfect isn't really a possibility. So I'm done. Hands raised, open for amendments. I'm not doing the quorum motion with this one. That's going to be a separate motion. I have separate questions for JJ on that one. Okay, raise your hands because I know there's all kinds of thoughts.
And just, I see 4 hands raised, Mr.
Oh,
Seebeck,
I don't
Mr.
see
Rolette,
any.
Mr. Bracco, and me.
I got the dumb. Okay, hold on. Oh, I see him now. Okay, Zoom isn't. So I'm going to go to Mr. Seebeck first. I'm just going in the order I see them because everyone will get to talk. Mr. Seebeck.
Okay, earlier you had asked the question about the terms about which one is removal with due process and which one is not. 6216 in Roberts gives the details. The or is
Right, no
without
process.
no
Yeah.
process, and is with, but we already have and in here on these.
And I
So-
think, okay, yeah, sorry, I don't mean to do a back and
Yes.
forth. Thank you.
So that's a non-factor. To address the 2-year gap, I did put a possibility in the chat. But I'm not totally sold that that's the right answer. And I believe what I said was add the words or the next regular convention after the next regular non-presidential convention. I'm not sure if that's would plug the gap or not. I'm throwing it out there for thought.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Latham.
Yeah, one was just kind of a history. Just I recall at the Las Vegas convention, the first Gary Johnson nomination convention, where just there was the concern that we were running out of time for internal party of elections, and the rumor running around was, oh no, we're not going to elect an LNC, and it will be the current horrible LNC. And I'm just using horrible in quotes there, just the detractors, that's what they were saying. will, get to appoint their successors or just stay in power or whatnot. So that's why we need to rush through whatever process we're engaged in to get to elections. I think so. Just that's at least an understanding culturally. Was that necessarily required by the bylaws at that time? I couldn't give you a quick answer on that. And then also just I want to throw out this idea. I wonder if we do need this for the Judicial Committee as opposed to just the officers and the at-large members, because there is already this mechanism in the existing bylaws at Article 8, Section 1, I believe, that allows the Judicial Committee, if there's all of them vacant, the intervening convention. Well, wait, that's already there. If they're all vacant, an intervening convention may fill the vacancies. So I don't know that we need that. I get it that it is a motivating factor. And I did want to mention just the other aspect that there is language in there that committee members can, on the Judicial Committee, fill, if there are vacancies, can vote to fill that. So that's all I want to add for now.
Okay, I'm going back to my chair. I hit unchair by accident. And okay, 1 second. I need to go back to my participants list. Mr. Roulette.
I started off in favor of the Bracco amendment, but as I've been thinking about it and listening to it, I'm edging toward being more opposed to it. I guess like my question is, let's say that there were no JC elected at the 2026 convention because we ran out of time. Would it be in order for a delegate at the 2028 convention, assuming that the amendment did not pass, would it be in order for somebody at the 28 convention to move to suspend the rules to open nominations and have an election for the Judicial Committee then? Like, can you suspend the rules to do it even assuming that this isn't here?
This is already in our bylaws. So if you go down to the very bottom, should all Judicial Committee positions be vacant, which is what would happen if we do not have a JC election in 2026. They would be vacant for 2 years, but an intervening convention may fill these vacancies, meaning the 2028 convention. There would be no rules. It's already baked into the bylaws to allow that. But between 2026 and 2028, you would not have a JC.
And okay. Okay, I understand now. All right, cool, thank you.
You're welcome, Mr. Bracco.
Madam Chair, if you would like to speak to the main motion, I can go next in line, or I can go after you. I do intend to propose that amendment.
I forgot. Oh, I was going to, no, I'll wait because I was going to speak to something that I thought was going to be moved and it ended up not being moved. And I'll want to speak to your amendment. So you go ahead, Mr. Bracco.
Sure. So, the amendment that I'd like to make, could you scroll down? It's on the next page. There, top of the next page, but it's the next page. So it's that last sentence. Should all Judicial Committee positions be vacant? So after the vacant, but before that comma, I will paste that part in chat.
Yeah, because I don't have your language up.
So that's the first part.
Okay, wait.
And then I'll paste the second part just for reference in a moment.
So after the comma.
Yep. It would be, or if no Judicial Committee elections were held at the immediately preceding regular non-presidential convention. And I know that's a mouthful, but that's what it calls things. And then the second part is inserting the second whole Judicial Committee elections is prior to the may fill such vacancies, and then it would strike the may fill such vacancies.
I do not have any idea what you just said.
So in the chat, the second part of the
Mhm.
amendment is the words hold judicial committee elections. And those would go prior to, in the second part of the sentence, may fill such vacancies. They go, basically, they're replacing may fill such vacancies. So strike may fill such vacancies, replace with hold judicial committee elections.
Don't you mean to keep that may?
Uh,
I'm looking at your amendment.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
okay. Sorry. Maybe I did the wording
May
wrong.
hold judicial committee election.
Yeah, I keep the may there. Yes.
are
Is it
you
may?
keeping though this language here too?
Yeah, it's not changing it
Okay.
at all. Not a bit.
Okay.
I am in no way opposed to that language. I can explain why I want to do this.
I know green is generally means keep. I'm just doing what I can do easy. So the yellow language is what you wish to put in, and the green language is what you wish to strike. So it would say, or if no judicial committee elections were held at the immediately preceding
It's
regular, oh my God, non-president.
it's not the best wording, but
I think
I'm
there's a better
borrowing
way to word
everything.
that, but anyway,
So
preceding regular non-presidential convention, an intervening convention may hold judicial committee elections, I think. Oh, I missed your S. You did have an S. I just didn't copy it. Okay.
yeah. So I can even speak to that goofy language, and yes, I admit it is goofy and it doesn't sound good, but I think there's precedent for all of those words.
Go ahead. Speak to your amendment.
So the point that I'm trying to get here is I don't hate anything that's been proposed. What I think is that this is plugging, at least in my opinion, a bit of a hole. If we were to pass the rules that are defined here, then a JC term that didn't have the successors elected at it would turn from a 4-year term into an 8-year term.
Mhm.
I figure that delegates and the JC members themselves probably would not like that as much. I think that using the presidential election as a backup plan has worked for us before. It allowed the 2020 convention to elect a JC. This would just be applying that same procedure here as well. So I kind of would view it as the almost the best of both worlds, where you get to keep your JC when you fail to elect one, but then you also get to elect the new JC that you failed to elect at the next convention that you have, which would be the presidential one. So why did I put immediately preceding regular non-presidential convention? So those are from two different places. So immediately preceding is I lifted that from Article 14.1. It's talking about immediately preceding a presidential election, the regular convention immediately preceding a presidential election. So because that's what I wanted it to do, is the prior convention didn't hold JC elections, and we're not arguing about which convention didn't hold JC elections. And then regular non-presidential convention is already, there's significant precedent for using that particular terminology in this article itself. It's referred to it like 4 or 5 times. So I'm just taking that, lifting it from there and putting it here as well. And that was Article 14.1. That one's really short, but it uses that same phrase to refer to the convention immediately prior to a thing. So this is really just, I'm not heartbroken if this doesn't pass, but if we were to pass it, then the fix that was done in the 2020 convention to address not holding JC elections that happened in 2018, it would no longer be possible. And really, I would, if this doesn't pass, I kind of think, I mean, I don't know that we should strike it because that's more trouble than it's worth, but this whole section, this last sentence, kind of becomes irrelevant because the only time you'd ever use it is if the entire JC resigned all at the same time between the non-presidential convention that they were elected and the presidential election. So in those first 2 years. That's such a niche case. It kind of defeats the whole purpose of having this section. And to be fair, it is because we've sort of plugged the hole of the most significant hole. So I don't want to say that. So anyway, I'll be quiet now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bracco. Just so you know, like if you see any complaints anywhere on social media, we've had some obvious trolls try to enter the chat. Probably going to have to go back to requiring me to personally approve each registration. But the problem is I'm not letting anyone in now unless I know they're a committee member. If you see someone complaining anywhere, let me know that they're legitimate and I'll let them in. But I'm not letting, for instance, Fatso De La Cruz in. Fatso can wait in the waiting room. I apologies if Fatso is Fatso's real first name. Okay, I'm speaking against the amendment, and here's why. It's too complicated. I want to pass something that's going to fix the problem and not be like, oh my God. We're already dealing with niche cases to perfect the what do you call it that you throw out to somebody who fell overboard? You know, that ring.
Life preserver.
It's like that, yeah, but that's what you like wear. What do they call that round thing? That lifesaver? Whatever.
Or a lifesaver.
Yeah, I think trying to make that into a cruise ship is just a mistake. These are some catch-alls for some odd just screw ups that might happen. We've already screwed up. You're not going to make it perfect. The terms of office of the JC are 4 years. Their successors are elected in 4 years unless it's completely vacant. I just want to avoid that 2-year period. Adding all this language, I think is just dooming this to fail and is making the perfect the enemy of the good. And I would urge everyone just to stick with the language we have originally, which is simple. And if we ever got into this kind of situation, we would just urge everyone to elect the JC to find the time to do it, or the people that are there now will serve for another 4 years. Hopefully we'll get to a time in our party again where the JC never has to do anything anyway. Okay, who is after me is Mr. Latham.
Yeah, I did just want to alert the committee to the prior language there in Article 8, Section 1, where the remaining members of the Judicial Committee shall appoint new members if vacancies occur. So, you know, we've got that option. And so, and I say this because of something in the chat, like, oh, it would be vacant. Would it remain vacant? Probably not by the time a convention rolls around. So yeah, I worry that the discussion is going to, oh, there's a vacancy, so there gets to be an election at the intervening convention or intervening convention. Well, again, that scenario is highly unlikely, and that's why, you know. Oh wait, somebody said something? Okay, thank you. And so somebody suggested like getting rid of the word all, should all, like how about just some of the positions be vacant? Well, again, I think this last sentence there is just that scenario where you don't have a mechanism for the remaining judicial committee. And I think that weird convention we had, it was only one person who, you know, got to have the appointed everybody else basically from the prior committee. I think it was Dr. Moulton, if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, yeah, I'm leaning against the amendment just because I think it overcomplicates what the intention of this initial amendment is. And yeah, I guess I don't think that it forces a bad situation. I was a little concerned with the amendment that yeah, we might get that 4-year scenario. I just think we have interim measures in the existing bylaws to cover vacancies to where I think it's highly unlikely that they would be elected at an intervening convention. And we're already covered for the possibility if we don't have any judicial committee members. So that's it.
Okay, just one moment, and I'm going to be calling on Mr. Bracco, but I do see a guest that has their hand raised. The committee debate is for committee members only, though you could type something in chat, and if a committee member wants to ask for you to speak, that's kind of how we handle it. And that's why I keep lowering your hand, so please keep it lowered, but if you have a request to make in chat, perhaps a committee member will ask. Mr. Bracco.
So I do want to point out one thing in what Mr. Latham said. This language would not authorize elections if, say, there was just a vacancy. If you held elections at the prior convention, you elected the 7 members, and somebody resigned, say, a week prior to the convention, that doesn't, like, the elections were held, so this doesn't apply. So I think this is still kind of a fallback option. I think it's just, and I don't think that this is turning it into the Titanic or whatever cruise ship. This is essentially saying we are going to buy a life preserver or a set of life preservers. Do we care about the color? Well, relative to having life preservers, no, we don't. But if you're buying them new anyway, might as well pick the color you want rather than just any old color. That's kind of what this is doing. Is I think is it marginal? Yes. Does it give delegates more choice? I think also yes. The language is a little bit janky. I think it has to be that way. But I think that the effect is fairly straightforward and can be explained easily.
Okay, at the risk of, I'm gonna put my hand up just so I'm doing things properly. I'm gonna repeat myself just a tiny bit. JC terms are 4 years unless there's no JC. This is kind of crafting a provision for a 2-year term, which should be rare. So that's another objection I have to it. It's leading the way to just make the JC a 2-year term again. That's the discomfort I was feeling, that I couldn't put my finger on it. We went to 4-year terms for a reason. This complicated language is just going to lead to a future bylaws committee just going, fuck it, we're going to go back to 2-year terms, which I think going to 4-year terms was the best idea. Do not want to be introducing this quasi 2-year term provision in here again. That all being vacant was just one weird thing. I don't want to build upon it to where it's just easier to clean up the bylaws by making it a 2-year term again. I'm trying to lower my hand, but Zoom hates me. Is there anyone further on this amendment? Okay, there is obviously difference of opinion, so we're going to hold a roll call vote. A yes vote would adopt this amendment, and again, to be clear, the amendment is to add in the words in yellow at the end here and strike the words in green. This part still remains pending earlier. Mr. Bracco's amendment did not touch that. Ms. Arrowwood, if you would take the roll, please.
All right, Arrowwood, I'm going to say no. Bracco,
Yes.
Sizelski,
Abstain.
Latham,
No.
Martin,
No.
Dave Roberson,
Yes.
okay, Tom Rowlett,
No.
Roger Roots,
No.
right? Mike Seebeck,
No.
right? Madam Chair, at this point, we have 2 yes, 6 no, and 1 abstain. Do you care to vote?
I will not be voting. Thank you. That amendment does not pass. So let me get this language up the screen. And I do appreciate what you were trying to do, Mr. Bracco. Oh, God. That's what I'm looking for. So we're back to the main amendment. Which is simply adding at the end of each of these various terms of things that are elected at convention to add at which their successors are elected to provide that the party does not implode if for some reason either bad actors adjourn sine die, or, a fire breaks out in the building and someone makes an ill-advised motion to sine die, or any number of things that could possibly happen, that the party still survives. And I would hope that this would be motivation for people to get more educated on that, and no bad actors to ever try this, particularly if they didn't like the current LNC, because then they would just be giving them another term. And I think this would greatly motivate people to make sure they have elections. Mr. Latham.
So I guess returning back to my original comment about the Las Vegas convention, where this possibility of not electing an LNC was, floated as a potential prospect to rush through business. I guess I just want to throw out, this is almost a question, maybe parliamentary wise, by adding this language, do we possibly create the prospect that we don't have LNC elections at a convention, and therefore we're stuck with the LNC we had prior? Is that the implication of this if this
Oh, it
passes?
definitely is the implication, because I don't care what they said in Las Vegas. That's why I was making sure with JJ that my instinct is correct. If they were making, I don't know what claims they were making, but if you have a convention and an LNC is not elected, and there isn't this weird circumstance where there's one member that's the Region 4 alternate, the party's done.
Well, thank you, and that answers my question. But I guess, and it sounds like, again, I'm just trying to work this through in my mind. It looks like the scenario. I mean, I'm not so worried about the scenario in which we don't have an LNC at all. I'm more looking at the scenario where we don't have LNC elections at a convention, and therefore the incumbent LNC just becomes the LNC for the next term for that reason. And I can see, again, from a Machiavellian perspective, some may want to have that outcome, and maybe, a lot of delegates don't want that outcome. So I just want to make sure we're kind of being clear-eyed at that. That's what's happening here, because I guess I find myself a little uncomfortable with that. So I don't know if it's to the point that I would want to vote against it, but I might end up abstaining on this.
I'm not going to enter into debate. I'm going to put my hand up for debate, but I do want to make sure, because at one point I think you understood clearly the answer to the question, and then with your further comments, I think maybe we weren't seeing here. Parliamentary wise, the option isn't between, forget about the Region 4 thing. Let's pretend Region 4, because that's an unusual situation. If an LNC is not elected at a convention, there is no more national party. So it isn't an option between, oh, I don't even know what you were suggesting the other potential option was that they were suggesting. But if there are no members of the LNC that are in office at adjournment sine die, the national party is over. That is the concern here. That's not a possibility at this convention to any bad actors who might be watching this video, because Region 4 will be seated. So if anyone is thinking of that for the next convention, if you're okay with Adrian selecting the next person, who then those two select the next person as I described before, okay, fine. But this is the option that this is trying to fix. You either keep your current LNC, you can keep your health plan if you like it or not, or you implode the party. Okay, I think I saw Mr. Bracco next. I'm in line, but then there was Mr. Seebeck, who hasn't spoken on this. And I don't know if Mr. Latham intended to keep his hand up. So Mr. Bracco.
I do.
Given that I've spoken on this, I'm fine with Mr. Seebeck going ahead of me.
Okay, Mr. Seebeck.
Yeah, I just had a question regarding the scenario you just described without this language. If we had, under the current wording, an adjournment sine die without officer elections, wouldn't there still be regional reps selected by the regions outside of the convention the way it normally occurs now? And if that's the case, wouldn't that take the argument there wouldn't be an LNC and just kind of shoot it down? I'm not sure I follow that completely.
I know. Okay, I think that's a judicial argument to be made, that I prefer not to ever get in that situation. The caucuses are held with convention delegates at the convention normally. The region is formed when the signed regional agreement is given to the national secretary. If there is no national secretary, I think a very good argument is made that you don't have that. And if those elections are, okay, I'll go even further. If those elections are held after sine die, I think you don't have a party after that sine die. That if they had the elections prior to that sine die and gave the agreements to the secretary, then possibly, and that's kind of like the Region 4 situation.
Okay. That does answer my question.
I think, but I do think it's an interesting legal argument that you made that could be made, but I prefer not to be there.
It's more of a process question, I guess, but still, you've answered it and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I wanted to, even though I'm kind of breaking our own rules here where we're interacting with chat, which we kind of have a rule against that, but these are some weird situations. Jessica made an excellent point about, some Machiavellian LNC that wants to stay in power. The fact is, if they've got the majority votes to adjourn and just keep everybody, they've got the votes to elect them, because that's the implication of that vote. But anyway, Mr. Bracco, I'm sorry.
Sure. So I would like to speak in favor of this proposal. I believe, just to speak on the prior comment briefly, I believe that the regional caucuses are after the first day of the convention. So if you were to adjourn on that first day, absent a Region 4 situation, none of them would have happened. If you adjourn on the second day, then I guess it's 8 or maybe even 9 people who are selecting all of the at-large and the officers, and then that's a little bit better than just one region. But either way, I think that while this does open up like very marginal Machiavellian things, I think it's a very good point that if you have the votes to do this sort of thing, you can just elect, certainly at least the officers and the at-large. I really think that at best, this is a very marginal issue versus an existential issue. And I think that I think it's no contest. I think that we should solve the existential issue, even if that means that we bring on a little tiny marginal issue where somebody could play a little bit of Machiavellian politics, like that's never happened before at a convention.
Thank you, Mr. Bracco. Mr. Latham?
Yeah, and just wanted to bring committee members' attention. I just posted this in the chat, but it's Article 7, Section 7. Just the National Committee shall appoint new officers and members at large if vacancies occur, such officers and members at large to complete the term of office vacated. And I posted that, and I guess this, again, I'm coming back to this Las Vegas scenario. I would have to go back and look, but I guess I want to say what it was maybe floated as like, oh, we had officer elections, but we didn't have LNC elections, or again, just consider that as a possible scenario. So one group gets to select the remaining group. And obviously some people, well, understandably, a lot of people would think that is not fair. But I also think that if it's the national committee, I believe that includes the regional reps, although there's proposals to adjust that. So I'm not seeing the existential crisis. So again, that comes back to I wonder if this is solving a problem that we don't have, and again, just the possibility that it maybe even makes things worse, because rather than let the national committee appoint new officers and members at large, if we don't have those kind of elections, what it does is let the incumbents carry over until the next convention, and that strikes me as more anti-democratic than the other way around. Again, if I'm just looking at this right, this is a complicated issue, but that's just the way I'm seeing it right now. I'm open and listening to other people tell me I don't have it right.
I see a point you've raised that I didn't consider, and Mr. Jacobs, I do see your request. I will ask the committee in a moment. I want to ask Mr. Latham something. Okay, my scenario is in which there is nobody left to appoint anybody. That Article 7, Section 7 is if there are some remaining members, they then get to fill vacancies. The scenario I'm positing is where no elections have taken place. However, you did raise something in my mind where you're like, though, do we really have to have the entire former LNC just continue their term? I'm going to raise something else here, but this raises different problems, because then you're dealing with the LNC appointing maybe we just need to have this language in there for the officers? Because really, what's required, like, to have with the FEC and the minimum to make sure we don't implode the party is if the officers at least stay, and you've got your chair who's running the party. I mean, you have your officers, but then if the at-large was not elected, and then the officers would fill it. I think it raises a whole interesting question with the regions. I would almost suspect that we wouldn't have regions for that term if we adjourned without the regional caucuses, because those regions expire, but that's still better than imploding the party. And Roger, I think you're incorrect on that. Organizations cannot automatically regenerate themselves. You have to have some kind of, now perhaps judicially we can make an argument for that. We're trying not to have that, and it's we've seen this happen with state parties. It's actually not that unrealistic. But Mr. Jacobs, go on, if without objection from the committee, about the Machiavellian aspect.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there is no objection, don't think that's an objection. But yes, my concern would be this, that at some point during a convention, a few people are out of the room and a minority of the delegates, but still a quorum, decide that they're going to adjourn the meeting sine die. There is not a lot that could be done to stop that if you do not elect people, except to try to keep people in the room, so that you don't get that. But something could happen where if you're not careful and there were just enough people there, this kind of thing can happen. I will also note that I do disagree with Mr. Roots as well, that this can be a problem. I have provided a link to an article that I wrote a few years ago that does deal with this kind of a situation. So if somebody wants to take a look at it, they may. Thank you, and I'm sorry for interrupting again.
Yeah, I think that just has to be used as motivation to keep people in the room. Is this a perfect solution? No, and it is a doomsday. It is a doomsday scenario. And I do see how it could be played in a Machiavellian way. I'm more concerned about the survival of the party than an LNC. I don't like continuing for 2 more years. I mean, and I'm envisioning the worst possible LNC too when I'm doing this. Now, I know some people think that this one might be, but I'm thinking of last term. I'd have rathered all of those people stay on the LNC for 2 more years than risk the party. You know, maybe this isn't the best solution. It's what I'm putting forward now. I will not cry if people want to think about this a little more. I am not looking to set up some kind of, weird situation. I'm not worried about it for this convention because of Region 4. I'm thinking of the future. Mr. Latham, I believe, was first.
Well, so I was actually leaning toward, maybe tabling this with the idea that we might come back to it. But also I thought I heard our sponsor say that maybe one solution would be and I don't know if we did this, did we take this proposed language out of Article 8, the Judicial Committee?
No,
And okay, so it's still there at least. So, but I thought I heard a warmness to the motion to just leave it in Article 6 for officers, but not do it for Article 7 and 8. So if I guess that's my motion, is to strike those changes, but leave it in for Article 7. And then just speaking to that, I think that partly that solves the problem of continuity.
wait, hold on 1 second, Mr. Leith. I'm not trying to do debate. I'm just thoroughly confused. What there was, and I want to clarify something. The warmness was just me suggesting something. I don't know if anyone else was particularly warm to it. Which was leaving this language in for 6, the amendment,
Right.
taking it out for 7.
Yeah.
But the Judicial Committee is an entirely different issue. It's not an existential one to the party.
So do you need it there or not need it there?
I would leave 8 there, but if you're thinking of not having it be the entire LNC, you could just leave it in for just for the officers, because those are the essential ones to recreate the party, I guess is.
Well, right. So if they're essential, and I think I'm inclined to agree, rather than carry over the Judicial Committee for another 4 years, I think there can be we have that intervening convention language. So it wouldn't be, I just think, the end of the world if there was that intervening time. Again, all have to be gone, because otherwise, if there's even one remaining, they can just appoint other members to that committee. So that's why I think 6, my proposal is 6 stays just to avoid the existential crisis, but then there's not this existential need for the same change in 7 and 8.
I mean, you can make that motion. I'm going to amend it. If you do, just letting you know. Is that the motion you're making?
Yes.
Okay, so it's to leave this language in 6.
Yes.
And to strike it out of 7, to
Correct.
just leave the language as it originally exists, and same thing for 8.
Yes.
Did you wish to speak to this?
I think I've spoken plenty.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not next. Mr. Bracco was next. Do you want to speak to the amendment, or are you waiting till we get to the?
Well, when
underlying?
I raised my hand, I was going to speak against the potential amendment, but now that it's become actual, I think that this is it's not an existential issue, but I think it's a bad idea. Sorry. So if we're using last term as an example, putting feelings aside on how the LMC was, let's say that sorry, somebody were to try to run out the clock, try to be Machiavellian and prevent officer or any kind of elections from occurring. So then if this were to pass, if this amendment were to pass, and then the proposal were to pass, they could do so, and they would have a fairly good chance. I think actually they would have a chance. They would have a certainty, basically, of being able to pick the at-larges. While it might be unfortunate at times that, say, somebody's term got extended and maybe that particular convention body would have elected somebody else. Just positing the example, what is the likelihood that the officers from the 2020 to 2022 LNC would have reelected Josh Smith to be an at-large, even though the convention delegates had selected him back in 2020? I think it is 0. Now, you could easily flip that and have the opposite scenario.
Can I ask that
that's your
we
preference.
not mention specific names, please?
Oh, apologies. It was just as an example, like that.
More general, though, please.
Sure. There could be particular at-large members who a particular faction could have an animosity towards, and they potentially have control of the officers, and that I think this opens up additional Machiavellian maneuvering that the original language does not.
Thank you, Mr. Bracco. I agree with you on that. I tend to think it needs to be the entire LNC, which has a lot more chance of being factionally diverse, which it isn't this term, but in general, than just 4 officers. However, existentially, all you need is the 4 officers. Removing it from the JC here, I think, is a big mistake. The JCs is a different issue, and you particularly if all you have left is the 4 officers, you don't want to not have a JC, because what if they put off there? This is a whole other issue, by the way. It doesn't say when the LNC has to fill vacancies. Those 4 officers can choose never to fill those vacancies, and those 4 just control the party without a JC. Oh my God. We definitely, so I am going to move to amend to strike the strike of article from the JC. That JC one's got to stay in there. If we're just going to keep the officer one in there as kind of like, the doomsday scenario, that's fine. But the JC has to stay in there to protect the party members. Before I make that amendment, because then the debate's going to be limited to that, if for some reason we pass this and it's just the officers that stay as our proposal, I'm going to ask someone else to argue this to the convention. I think it'll seem entirely self-serving for a current officer of the party who is the bylaws committee chair to be arguing like, oh, if y'all screw things up, only the officers get to stay, and I will not feel comfortable presenting that. And I think it would poison it if I did. But if you guys think it's the best proposal, the committee would just select one other person to present this proposal. I'm comfortable proposing it when it's the entire LNC, but I don't want it to look like I'm trying to pull something over where, I'm secretary for life or something, because that just makes me feel very weird. But I am now moving to strike the strike from the amendment, which is to keep this in, to keep the JC, well, you all know what it says, to keep the JC in. And so all that would remain is striking it from Article 7, with the implications being, in this kind of doomsday scenario, the officers would remain. They could appoint the remainder of the LNC, but there's nothing in our bylaws that require them to. And that gets into a whole other thing of like, what if 3 of the officers don't like one of them? It'd be so easy to just remove them. I don't. I was the person who floated that, but I'm not warm to it. Okay, Mr. Latham.
And I think you beat me to my own either withdrawal of that part of my amendment or making my own substitute. But and related, because I think I've been persuaded by our conversation that even, yes, if we had this holdover JC for another 4 years, you might get resignations and then they could, fill vacancies that way. So I guess I'm less concerned if there's a holdover JC. But I did also want to point out just to the committee, Rule 1 in our convention special rules of order, which of course can be amended, but we did change that a couple years ago to kind of bump up those elections, judicial committee even coming in first, even before party officers and at large. And it has not always been that way. I'm not sure actually, has it ever been that way? So, that stuff, we moved it up, of course, to avoid the scenario we had a couple of years ago where we pushed that stuff all the way to the back. And again, that could change, but I just think that the scenario of not having JC election or other elections has been reduced by that change of order. But I'm like I said, I'm now okay with leaving that language in the Judicial Committee section. But it sounds like maybe we've reached a compromise with pulling it out of the at-large section.
We've gone a bit too far into debate, and since it's not withdrawing your whole amendment, it's just part of it. We've got to play this through. We without any further hands, though, I can ask, is there any objection to striking the strike, which would leave in at least that portion in the Judicial Committee section?
Can you say that again? I just got totally confused by what you just said.
Okay, so Mr. Latham's amendment was to strike the proposed added language from both Article 7 National Committee and Article 8 Judicial Committee. And I am moving to strike his strike so that the proposal would be to just strike it from 7 and not from 8.
So your proposal to amend would leave it in which
8.
one?
8
Which
Judicial
is-
Committee.
But still take it out for the LNC.
Yeah, I'm amending his amendment. It would take
Okay,
it out
I'm
for
just
the.
trying to get this straight because it's a little confusing. Okay, I think I got
Yes.
it.
So is there any objection to that? Okay, hearing none. So now we're on the main amendment, which is to just strike it from here. And so in the case of either an existential crisis or a situation, because I think there's another implication here that I don't think anyone brought up, so I am speaking further against the amendment. My whole purpose in this was to avoid an implosion. That's it. That's my only purpose. If we strike it, I forgot what I was going to say now. I saw like before me another alternative scenario that if we strike it from National Committee and they amend the agenda so that they elect the National Committee first, then there could be a move to adjourn sine die and the old officers stay in place when it's no longer an existential crisis. I'm tending to think that we need to, there's just too many things at play here, and perhaps we need to postpone this motion and come up with another answer that just deals with the potential doomsday scenario. That perhaps we need, I don't know. We're still on the amendment. However, Mr. Sieb, Dr. Moulton and Mr. Martin have not spoken at all to this. So Dr. Moulton.
Does my microphone even work? Can you all hear me?
Yes, it does.
Okay, great. So I apologize that I was late to the meeting here. So I don't know if you all have already discussed this, but the existential threat to the LNC is not as great if we still have regionals, because I think, are we assuming regionals aren't elected? Because I mean, wouldn't regions normally be organized? Are we assuming if regions aren't organized, they cease to exist? Just because
they do cease to exist if they're not organized.
Okay, because regions outnumber at large plus the officers usually. So usually a majority of the LNC would exist with just regions, even if there were no at large and officer elections. But I guess that's a concern you guys have, that regions wouldn't happen either.
Let me summarize for you. It would depend upon the timing of when regional caucuses were. And I think there's kind of a big gray area there because regions aren't formed until the signed regional agreements are turned into the party secretary. But if you adjourned before you have a secretary, who did they get turned into? Are they really formed? It's not a concern for this convention because Region 4 forms early. So we will have, even if somebody tried something like this convention, Region 4 will exist. This is more for a future where you don't have California being its own region forming early. If regions form early and turn in their regional agreements, because you have that 90-day window, then certainly we would have them.
Yeah, because I would think in general, regions could fill the rest of the LNC if we didn't get the LNC elections. And this was discussed previous bylaws committees as the solution to that existential threat.
But what
Although
if
that
they didn't
solution would
form,
not
though?
exist if we eliminated regions and just said at large. That's a whole nother can of worms, I guess.
Well, we're on the amendment at this point. But we did discuss that, Dr. Moulton, and I think in some circumstances, what you're saying is correct. And in other circumstances, it would not be. So it's iffy, though you are correct. If the regions had been validly formed by turning in regional agreements to a valid secretary, then yes, they would fill the rest of the LNC, even if it was just one region. We got into the whole thing, like if it was Region 4, they'd pick one person, and then those two would pick a third person, and those three would pick a fourth. You know how it goes. But if there was nobody, but I'm beginning to think this is just
Okay,
getting,
thank you. Thank you for catching me up. Sorry, I'm late.
yeah, no worries. We need to dispose of, actually, we could move to postpone the thing. It might not be exactly orthodox with the pending amendment. I think there's just too many questions that people have that maybe we need to think about this further. So,
And I wouldn't be upset if that happened.
yeah, and maybe everyone wants to read that article JJ had, because again, what I'm trying to prevent is a doomsday scenario. I don't really care how it's solved. I just want it solved.
Point of information,
Yes, Mr. Seeback.
which is what I was asking in the first place. Can you state exactly what the amendment currently is?
It's just to strike the proposed language at which their successors are elected from Article 7. So that in the situation that nobody got elected to anything, the officers would stay for an extra term.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, and the JC would stay for an
And
extra
yeah,
term,
but
right?
the JCs, yes, they would. Yes, they would. I guess I was doing it in the scenario of a doomsday scenario, because even if you still had a valid JC because they were in the middle of a 4-year term, it doesn't matter if you don't have an LNC, because the JCs, they're an appeal body. They're not the governance of the party. But I'm moving to postpone this whole thing indefinitely. And if somebody comes up with something else, we can bring it back up. I don't want to postpone it to the next meeting because I can't commit to thinking about this in the next week. So I'm moving to postpone indefinitely, which unless somebody brings it back up, it kills it. Is there any objection to postponing this indefinitely? Seeing none. I do ask everyone to think about this situation though. Again, I really don't care what the solution is. I'm not trying to wrangle extra terms for the LNC. If there's a way to solve it that doesn't involve that, I think that'd be politically more popular. My concern here is love of the party and not wanting it to die over something stupid. So we're moving on to where we divided the question. I actually thought that first part would be really easy. Here's where I'm going to ask JJ's with the indulgence of the committee. So I'm moving here. Where it has our quorum, it says a quorum shall consist of 40% of the total number of delegates registered in attendance at the convention. I'd like to strike total and put maximum. I'm going to speak to this. There's been, and Dr. Moulton will remember this, I'm sure, and some Mr. Roulette and some other old timers here may remember, there's an ongoing dispute at our conventions as to whether or not checkouts are allowed. Mr. Brown, I'll be perfectly honest with you, who's been the party parliamentarian since 2016, believes that they are, thinks that this language is slightly different enough from Roberts, because Roberts is crystal clear. Your quorum is of the highest number registered in attendance, regardless of whether any of them have since departed. I do not believe this language modifies that. And I can tell you the people who are on the side of agreeing with me on this, that checkouts are not allowed, is Alicia Matson. She's made that argument every single convention, and she gets Forrest Whitaker every time we do checkouts. And I did consult with JJ on this prior to this meeting to see what his opinion was, if it was the same as Mr. Brown's. And I had talked to Mr. Brown. I just disagree with him. When there is this ambiguity where there are people such as Mr. Brown and Ms. Matson, who are well regarded in the party, that have massively opposite opinions, I think we need to make it to where there's no ambiguity. I'm arguing for resolving it in this way rather than allowing checkouts, because you don't want an unrepresentative group of people making decisions for the entirety of the party. The whole idea of a quorum is you have a body of people, which is whatever delegates show up, and it needs to be a set percentage of those people. If some of them leave and we lose quorum, and this is another reason why I know why I paired these two together, because the concepts are somewhat related, but with the change in our order of business. But I think making it 40% of the maximum makes my other scenario more likely to happen. But I think this preserves the intent of quorum, because otherwise what happens if you have checkout and you have people who say maybe extend a convention to the next day. Most people don't plan to stay to the next day. And then you could, in theory, have 40% of 100 if a bunch of people check out, substitute in a whole other set of bylaws, like really catastrophic things. Our quorum needs to be set upon the maximum number of people who came. Feel super strongly about this, but in any event, this ambiguity needs to be resolved. One day, if something really bizarre happens and we don't change this language to be unambiguous, this could very easily end up in a court case. Insert bylaws here. Dr. Moulton. Oh, actually, before Dr. Moulton, Mr. Jacobs, did I correctly represent what your thoughts on this are?
With the committee's permission?
Yes.
Yes, you have done that. I tend to agree with Ms. Matson and with yourself, I believe. And I do have to disagree with Mr. Brown on this. I've heard his comments saying he spoke to one of the authorship team and who said that's not exactly what it says in Robert. I think it is close enough, but I think that you should be clarifying it to make this the case. I think this is one of those problems. Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I didn't misrepresent your thoughts on it. Dr. Moulton.
Yeah, I agree with Richard Brown. I think there are benefits to letting delegates check out. That said, I do think we should resolve the ambiguity. We could resolve it in either direction. I'm comfortable resolving it in this direction. However, if we do so, I think we're going to have more quorum problems than previously. Therefore, I would like to propose an amendment. I would like to change the number 40% to 30%.
Okay, just one moment here. I'm trying to find convention quorum, because I did want to read the quorum in conventions, 3-4. I knew it was in the very beginning. I just wanted to read to the body or give them the reference where they can look it up in Roberts. It's in here about 10 times. It's worded substantially the same in each of the times. In meetings of a convention, unless the bylaws of an organization provide otherwise, the quorum is a majority of the delegates who have been registered at the convention as in attendance, irrespective of whether some may have departed. The only change,
Beg pardon, where are you reading in Roberts?
3-4,
Thank you.
but you can find almost this exact quote in, like, I'm exaggerating when I say 10, but I do think it's in 3 other places. And it does say, unless the bylaws of the organization provide otherwise, the only difference in our bylaws is that it changes the majority to 40%. It does not change the irrespective of whether some may have departed. That is,
Are you speaking on my amendment?
no, I was just giving everyone the reference so they could go look for themselves.
Okay.
So now
well,
the amendment is,
My amendment was to lower the number 40 to 30. If we're basically gonna raise the denominator, I would like to lower the numerator to make it so that it's not substantially harder to maintain quorum.
thank you, Mr. Moulton. And I'm sure that your entire argument. Did you need to speak?
Yeah, just real briefly, I'm fine with resolving the ambiguity, but in doing so, I don't want to make it substantially harder for us to conduct business. And I think if we keep the number 40%, we don't let people check out. What basically happens if it's maximum is quorum will get harder and harder and harder to achieve as you get later into the convention. It will never get easier. Just people leave. So, the later you get in the convention, the more quorum calls you're going to get, and I just don't want to make it substantially harder for us to conduct business. So that's basically it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're now on the amendment. Mr. Latham, did you wish to speak to Dr. Moulton's amendment?
Yeah, although I don't know if I'm necessarily speaking for or against it, but I just wanted to throw out there's this concept. Again, I'm not a math guy, so I know just enough math to be dangerous in talking about math. But there's this thing I understand called the law of large numbers. And when they relate it to voter turnout, they say it really doesn't matter if you have large voter turnout or not so large voter turnout because people vote or do not vote kind of for the same reason. So it's evenly distributed and you're going to kind of get the same outcome whether there were 100 people voting or 1,000 people voting. Now, so as to this, you may, even though you drop the quorum from 40 to 30, you may again get evenly distributed outcomes because, again, delegates may leave or not leave for kind of the same reasons. Now, here's where I'm requesting assistance in the discussion for helping me, who is math challenged, grok this. So because when I see maximum replacing total, I'm just kind of missing the implications of that. And so someone could do for example, like there were 1,000 people who registered. Is that the maximum? Or if 100 people leave and we're now at 900, is that the maximum? So is it changing rather than a constant number? So that's what I'm seeking clarity on. Thank you.
I'll answer your parliamentary inquiry. It would be of the 1,000. It's of the highest number as having registered as being in attendance.
Thank you. So can I maybe follow up my question with, so, well, maybe this is debate, but I just wonder if it's maximum, why don't we just say the highest rather than maximum? Thank you.
Okay, next then, Mr. Roulette, we're on Dr. Moulton's amendment. Let a little bit of straying from that go, but let's not please do too much. I'm opposed to lowering the quorum. Per Roberts, you know, which has hundred and something years of experience in this, though I don't know if that section has remained unchanged, so I can't really speak to that. They recommend that your quorum be 50%. We're already low irrespective of whether anyone has attended. So I think we're already going low when we go to 40, and I'm okay with 40. Would never be okay with 30. In other words, if we had a full convention of 1,050, which is the average of a full convention, you'd have just over 300 people being your quorum. That's too low. If people leave and some things don't get done, then some things don't get done. I think it's more an expectation of people, their delegates, they need to stay at convention. And I have to tell you, I already think without this amendment, I think this is already what our bylaws say. And if just FYI, people try doing checkout stuff this convention, I'll be right there with Alicia Matson raising a point of order like she does every convention. I don't know how long this checking out thing has been going on, but I think one day it's gonna bite us in the booty. But I'm totally against lowering it to 30. Mr. Roulette.
Okay. I appreciate Dr. Moulton's motives here, and I am 100% with him on that, but I'm gonna vote against this amendment because I think that there's a better way to accomplish it. And I'll have an amendment as soon as we vote on this one.
You're allowed to say what your amendment would be if you think that would sway people.
Okay. Basically, I think we're asking the word maximum to do a lot of heavy lifting here. And I don't think that changing total to maximum solves the ambiguity. I do think that people ought to be allowed to check out or not check out. You know, you can force a quorum call. Anyway, but instead of changing the word total to maximum, which is, I mean, whether or not that helps, whatever. But rather than do that, just put in a comma after the word total or maximum, and then insert either the words, including those who have checked out, or not including those who have checked out. And in that way, you've used the words check it out. Like there goes all the ambiguity. You're shouting it out. You're saying, there either is or is not checkout, and I believe there should be checkout. And my belief and hope is that most of the delegates at convention think the same as I do, so I'm pretty comfortable going that way instead.
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. Mr. Bracco hasn't spoken yet.
I was going to ask a parliamentary inquiry, but now I forget what it was. So I'll go to the back of the line.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moulton.
Yeah, I do not think that our organization is the same as most organizations that are governed by Roberts here. The practical reality is that many people who come to our conventions are interested in a small portion of the business. In presidential years, many people come to the convention and all they care about is selecting our presidential or vice presidential candidate. And because of that, often right after those are selected, they leave. They don't care about the rest of the business. And to a lesser extent, but still to some extent, in off years, there are some people who only care about selecting the LNC, bylaws, platform, whatever, boring. and leave right after that. That leaves us with a huge quorum problem. Those people who leave, I mean, most of them, they pick their schedule because they don't care about that other business. And that should not prevent the rest of us from doing that other business just because they don't care about it. They're not leaving because they want to deny that other business. Most of them are leaving because they only care about certain business. And it makes complete sense to me that we have a quorum requirement that is much lower than 50%. So as a practical effect, we've been allowing people to check out, which has resulted in lower quorum requirements on the later days than if we did not allow people to check out and if we just kept the maximum quorum amount. I'm fine with resolving the ambiguity in either direction. Mr. Rowlett seems willing to resolve the ambiguity in the other direction, so allowing people to check out, which I would also be in favor of. If we resolve the ambiguity in this direction and just set in a maximum number, not allowing people to check out, I don't want us to be put in a situation where we effectively leave ourselves with a much higher quorum than previously on the last few days. Practically, I mean, as has been our custom in the past, that would leave us with a much higher quorum requirement. And practically what that means is two things. Number one, our conventions will adjourn earlier because we will lose quorum earlier. Second of all, even if we have quorum, if it's close, there will be a lot more quorum calls, which is going to waste a lot of convention time. That's the purpose of my amendment, that I still think that we should conduct business when there's a bunch of people there who want to conduct business, whether it be platform, bylaws, resolutions, whatever. We all have traveled a long way. There's been convention time that has been allocated. There was ample notice to everyone of what that time was, and we all want to get stuff done. The people who want to take their ball and go home because they only cared about particular business, be that the presidential election or the LNC, I think it's ridiculous that we should let slavish adherence to Robert's protocol, Robert's being the 50% threshold, to deprive us of the ability to conduct business. So I think it makes a lot of sense to lower the quorum requirement. If we're going to raise the denominator, which is effectively what we're doing by changing total to maximum, then we should lower the numerator, because I would like business to get done. And I think passing this bylaw, if we leave it at 40%, this is not just jiggling. It's not just changing one word, shifting periods, wordsmithing. This has a substantial practical effect on the business we can conduct. And it would substantially lower the amount of hours available to conduct business at each convention. We have generally somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people who travel long distances every 2 years and dedicate a significant amount of time and money for travel, hotels, etc., because they care about the business of this party. And if we deprive them of 5-6 hours of business by changing this word total to maximum, I think that's awful. So I would strongly encourage you all, if you're going to raise the denominator, we should lower the numerator. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. I thought there was another hand raised, but maybe Mr. Martin? Oh, there was Ms. Arrowood too, but Mr. Martin?
Well, I didn't have my hand up until just a few seconds ago, but I'll just say that I found Dr. Moulton's statement persuasive. I could certainly see where, if I traveled from New Mexico to the convention and then we were kept from doing a lot of business on account of a failure to have quorum, I would probably think twice about coming to a convention in the future. So thank you, Dr. Moulton, and that's all I have.
Ms. Arrowood? You're on mute, Ms. Arrowood.
After listening to Martin and Moulton, I've decided to lower my hand. They answered the queries I had.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to add to my argument. Mr. Latham posted the order of business. I know an argument can be made for platform. I tend to think we have a pretty mature platform now. I think the only thing that potentially you risk not being able to get to is platform. Because if people are just coming for the election, let's just say on an off year, the election of the party officers, bylaws comes before that. Bylaws won't even count those people yet because they haven't registered as being in attendance. If the argument is that people are just going to show up to elect the LNC, they're not even going to come onto the floor and register until that point, that's not going to cause a quorum problem, at least for bylaws, because that's the very first day. Now, potentially on a non-presidential year, because platform is after election of party officers, that could potentially be an issue. But I can tell you in the culture of this party, on a non-presidential year, the people who care about electing the party officers, they also care about the platform. And I think this is pushing a panic button. Now, if bylaws came after election of party officers, which is why we changed the order, yeah, plenty of people don't care about bylaws. It's far more important than platform, but people don't care about it. But anyone who comes to elect the party officers, if that's all they care about on a non-presidential year, they are going to stay for the platform. On a presidential year, that's why we moved the president to last. Well, you could say resolutions and other business are after that. We never, ever, even with checkout, we run out of time. We never get to resolutions and other business. I would love to see some minutes where we actually did. It's before my time, if it ever did happen. So the highest number we would have is already at the end of convention. So I think this is a theoretical panic and not a real one. Dr. Moulton.
This is a real panic. So if we look at the immediately preceding convention, the order of business was changed. A particular caucus of this party put forth a substitute agenda and changed the order. So yeah, they moved up LNC elections, and there were a substantial number of people. In this case, not enough to lose quorum, but still a substantial number of people who only cared about LNC elections and not about other things. And we can imagine a similar scenario in a presidential year where a popular enough presidential candidate might encourage people to come and tell people, oh, it's okay. You don't have to take off that much time from work. Just come for the first day. We'll reorder business. I will get the nomination and then you can leave. So this is not a theoretical problem. It's something that happened 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. And it's something that is very likely to happen in the future. I would be very comfortable not lowering the quorum requirement, given Ms. Harlow's argument, if we could set the order and prohibit people from altering the agenda by changing the order. But we've been told in the past that there's no way to do that because the order of business is in the nature of a rule of order, so that people would still have the ability to reorder that stuff. So this is not a theoretical problem. It's a problem that has come up in the past, will come up in the future.
Just to stick to points not already made, I don't think we ever, I'd have to look at my minutes. We didn't come even close. We had no checkouts in Reno. that issue didn't come up. Somebody started mumbling about it. Alicia Matson objected, and it just didn't come up again because we were never in danger of losing quorum in Reno. So I even with a drastic rearranging of the schedule, we weren't in danger of losing quorum in Reno. We were in danger of losing the audio video company, but not quorum. So I still don't think this is a realistic thing. I do not believe that, I don't think it's ever happened, that you're going to have a presidential candidate that's going to be able to organize delegates to rearrange it to have the presidential candidacy the first thing. Because then the danger would be that their delegates were told that this is what's going to happen. And if they don't have the votes, they've spent all of this money now to run for president. Those delegates are going to be there the whole weekend. So 30% to me is just far too low. You're dealing with 325 people being a quorum. So I don't want to repeat myself. Mr. Seebeck, I don't think has spoken on this. Mr. Seebeck.
Yeah, just a quick statement. One of the concerns about rearranging the schedule of the presidential things is the C-SPAN coverage, and that totally jacks that up too, which plays a factor, which I don't think it's ever happened in the 20 some odd years I've been in this party. I don't think they've ever switched it around and had that impact to the C-SPAN broadcast. It's always been consistent on the normal timing. So I think that's might be a little bit of an overstated concern.
Mr. Latham.
I guess this is in the nature of a parliamentary inquiry. So to Mr. Roulette's proposal and just how it relates to kind of the current proposals that we have in front of us, I find myself feeling that my vote is going to depend on whether that later language is added or not. And so the question kind of comes to if that language that Mr. Roulette, for example, proposes passes, can we go back and revisit these numbers and or the total maximum issue? So that's my question.
You can move to reconsider if you were not on the losing side of a vote. That's all I can really say on that. That's how something gets revisited.
Okay, no, that helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. I don't see any further debate on this. The motion is to strike 40%.
Point of information.
Yes, Dr. Moulton.
Are we few enough levels deep that Mr. Roulette could move to substitute at this point if he wanted to?
Mr. Roulette could move to substitute. However, there could be no amendments to his substitute. Here's, if we want to unwind this in order to allow everything to be perfected, this is what I would suggest, Dr. Moulton. I would suggest that you ask for permission to temporarily withdraw your amendment. Allow Mr. Roulette to make a primary substitute with his language. And then
I
both
asked
of
leave of
them,
the body to withdraw my amendment.
you see where I'm going.
Yes.
I would suggest everyone grant Dr. Moulton permission to do that. We'll come out with a better outcome. He's saying no objection. I'm going to leave that on the screen for just one moment. We are coming up on time in 5 minutes, just so everyone knows. Mr. Roulette, if you were going to move, well, you would be moving a substitute at this point, so we can have a couple head-to-heads here. This would stay at 40%. What is the language you were hoping for?
Well, first off, should I put it up now, or should I put it on the list and say, hey, everybody, we only got 5 minutes left and there's no way we're going to take care of this amendment? Would it be better to put the amendment out now or to leave it for next time?
I would put it out now because we do have a few more minutes and someone might move to extend time, but we at least might as well get it out now.
All right. So the substitute would be to keep the word total and forget maximum. And in addition to that,
Okay.
at the very end, at the very end of the last sentence, right before the period,
Okay.
put in a comma.
Hold on.
Not including those who have checked out. And make sure a quorum shall consist of 40% of the total number of delegates registered in attendance at the convention, not including those who have checked out. Correct. All right.
Maybe I'm being stupid. I'm not understanding. What does this mean?
So first, it references checking out, so that if you check out of the convention, you are no longer part of the total for the quorum. However, somebody could just leave the room and say, I don't want you guys to. It would give an individual delegate the option, if on the way out the door early, to say, I want to be considered part of the quorum, or I do not want to be considered part of the quorum, so that if they wanted to force a quorum call, they could, but they have the option to allow the rest of the delegates to continue modifying bylaws, platform, electing people, etc.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
If we're allowing checkout, the way we've done it before is Mark Montoni standing at the door and scribbling names on a piece of paper, which, in addition to me thinking that's against the bylaws, that's crazy. Before you formally make yours, you think like maybe who have not checked out with the credentials committee?
I've never been on credentials committee.
That's who they would have to check out for if you were actually going to
So they ought to.
legitimately have checkout. It can't be Mark Montoni standing at the door with a piece of paper.
Well, it could. I would rather leave that more flexible so that a convention may decide in what way people want to check out.
Should the kid? Oh, okay. They're still credentialed then. Okay. I don't think they have checked out. This causes more problems, but okay.
Well, I mean, is there better language than that?
What I just gave you.
Checked out by the credentials committee?
Yeah, because otherwise the credentials committee has them as there. The only people who can say they're not there anymore is the credentials committee.
All right, fine. But that means the credentials committee has to stay chilled out in the back, right? They have to have a table set up 24/7. Do they want to do that in
That's
general?
part of the problem with checking out.
In that case, I'm not going to put in a credentials committee because I want it to be flexible enough that there is a process and we can determine what that process is.
Okay, we're going to just stop 1 second here.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry that this is somewhat getting into debate, but I want whatever we pass to be successful, even if it's something that I don't agree with. They're not checked out. The numbers that we have to go by for quorum and for everything have to be adopted by the convention in a credentials committee report. You can't have just somebody standing there taking names. Then somebody can just say, well, I grabbed these names and make things up. You have to have an official process. It can't be done on the fly. We already have a process for deciding who's a delegate, and it's called the Credentials Committee. you can't just put this language in here without creating an absolute shipwreck. So literally, if you want to have checkout.
Point of order.
Okay.
But
Dr.
Madam
Moulton.
Chair, you seem to have a problem with this language, but you can amend it and we can amend it, and I intend to amend it if you
Okay.
call on me. So can we move on?
We
I have a
can.
I have a point of order, motion to adjourn.
Well, unless there is an extension of time, we will automatically adjourn.
I move to extend by 10 minutes.
Okay, there's a motion to extend for 10 minutes. Is there any objection to that motion?
Yes, I object.
There is objection. Ms. Arrowood, if you could do a quick roll call vote, please. It will take 2/3 to extend time.
Arrowwood, I'm going to say yes. Bracco,
Yes.
Sazelski,
Yes.
Harlos. I'm
Yes.
sorry. Yes, okay.
Well, I'm going to vote yes on this.
Okay, Latham,
Yes.
Martin,
No.
all right. Moulton,
Yes.
Rowlett,
Nope.
Dave Robertson,
Yes.
all right. Mike Seebeck,
Yes.
all right. Madam Chair, we have 8 yes and 2 no. At
Okay,
this,
time is extended for 10 minutes. We are, so now, we have a substitute. And I know Dr. Moulton wanted to reinsert his 40 to 30 to get back to where we were before, dealing with two competing.
No.
No, you do not? Okay, go
Well,
ahead, Dr. Moulton.
not at this time. I want to offer another amendment. if you would
Okay, so
recognize me.
let's get this back to the 40%. Go ahead, Dr. Moulton.
Maybe I misunderstood you. You're saying in a side-to-side thing? Well,
Yeah, I thought.
we can perfect that later, right? We don't
Okay,
have to
yeah,
perfect
we
that now.
can. I mean,
Okay, so in the roulette motion, I would like to add at the end with the credentials committee. May I speak to my motion?
oh, certainly.
Okay, this is the process that makes sense. The credentials committee is who needs to know these numbers, so that they can report them to the convention. So that is who they should check out with. In a larger sense, what Mr. Roulette is basically doing is resolving the ambiguity in the other direction. He is letting people check out. And in a larger sense, that you can conceive of that as each day is basically a separate session and people register for which day they want. And I don't think that that's really a problem. It's just two different ways of doing things. I'm fine with either way. I tend to like the checking out process, but if other people don't, other things fine too. And I like that Mr. Roulette is giving us an opportunity to look side by side and decide as a committee which process we like better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Sazelski, did you wish to speak on Dr. Moulton's amendment?
Not on the amendment specifically, no.
Okay, Mr. Latham?
I would just like someone to address and debate, just make it visual for some of us. So what about the people who leave but don't check out, and how does that affect the ability to conduct business going forward? I'd like to hear someone say that in debate, or if they want to consider it a question of parliamentary inquiry, Madam Chair, that could happen too.
The debate will have to be saved for debate, but I think Mr. Roulette had stated he wants to give people the opportunity to still be counted in the total, so they would still be counted in the total. If they just said, I'm not checking out, I'm just going home, that they have the choice to do that. Mr. No, Mr. Sazelsky already. So just briefly in favor with Dr. Moulton's amendment, that's the only way this can be done. Otherwise, they haven't checked out and it's not valid. You have to operate off a valid credentials report. And if credentials doesn't know and credentials has to certify it, they can't just take, I'm picking on Mark this convention because he's so helpful. And I don't mean to be picking on Mark because I adore him. If Mark Montoni's not on the credentials committee, they can't take his word for it that these 20 people said, oh, I want you to put me on my list. That's just not the way conventions work. We wouldn't check in people that way. And so you can't check out people that way. You got to go in the same way you went out. I'm going to ask, is there any objection to Dr. Moulton's amendment to the substitute? Seeing none, that is part of the substitute. Mr. Sazelsky.
Yeah, I think a big issue with this is just how it's gonna how it works when it comes to this checkout procedure and the fact that we have alternates. I mean, I see a real mess coming in, like, you know, trying to know who the alternates, you know, that there are alternates for a certain state. You know, I could see, I can foresee a possibility where it's getting reported in, you know, hey, this delegate checked out, that delegate checked out. But there's, you know, alternates sitting there. So, now you're trying to include in the report, well, there's still alternates for that state or this, that. I think it's going to end up being really confusing, where just the fact that we have alternates and we should be trying to fill those alternates really solves this issue of quorum, where, hey, we have the maximum number of delegates, which is basically set by a you know, formula of how many people per, you know, per state based on state party size and presidential vote percentage. That's the maximum number of delegates. There's alternates to back it up if people leave early. That's the role of alternates. So, you know, I think this whole thing is solved by one, electing better delegates who are there for to be there for all of business, to the best of their ability, and having a good stable of alternates to take up that spot.
Thank you, Mr. Sazelsky. I think you raised an interesting issue that it does cause an issue with alternates because a delegate checking out, this seems to insinuate it would automatically reduce the number, but it wouldn't, because the ranked alternate, if a delegate checks out, automatically slides into the delegate spot. And I think adding this checkout procedure in relation to quorum is going to really conceptually complicate things. Because if there's a delegate and there's an alternate, they both have to check out. Makes it complex. I'm almost getting to the point where I wouldn't be opposed if the entire proposal just goes down in flames, and I'll argue a point of order from the floor. Dr. Moulton.
A request for information. So suppose a state, let's pick a small state like Vermont, New Hampshire, or whatever. If they have a bunch of alternates but no delegates, then how does that currently affect quorum? Is quorum just based on the number of delegates, or are alternates sitting in, acting as delegates counted in the quorum number currently?
If, let's take a small state, let's just say Wyoming with 4 delegates, and let's say they have 10 alternates. They have this pool of 14 people. Until it gets below 4, that 4 will constantly replenish itself.
Right, that wasn't my question. So
Okay.
suppose Wyoming's allocation is 4, and they choose to send 1 delegate and 4 alternates. How would that affect the quorum number?
3 of them will automatically become delegates.
Okay, if that's the case, then I'm not understanding the problem that you're talking about here. I think this is something that is already in our procedure. So I don't see how this would change it.
I guess that's where I said conceptually, I'm not trying to make a weird allusion here, but I am. I'm going to make an allusion to the Trinity. You know, it's a logical priority and not a temporal one. Like, once a delegate checks out, if there's an alternate, that alternate automatically becomes a delegate. So it's simultaneous, but it has a logical priority. And I think trying to explain this to brand new people on the floor and trying to calculate a quorum is a conceptual issue that's going to cause a lot of confusion, maybe not actually a real one. I don't know if that made sense, Dr. Moulton. Mr. Seebeck.
I have 2 things. The first one is a request for information. Did
Yes.
we not have a prior proposal that would limit the number of alternates to the same amount of number of delegates?
Yes, we did. So if you
Okay.
had 4 delegates, you'd have 4 alternates.
Fair enough. And I call orders of the day.
Okay, unless there is an extension of another extension of time, we will pick up where we left off next time. So I'm going to see if there's an extension of time on this. Hearing no extension of time, we are adjourned at 9:18 Mountain Time. We're meeting again next week.